My name is Roger Berkowitz. I'm the academic director of the Hannah Arendt Center for Politics and Humanities here at Bard College. And it's my real honor and distinct pleasure to welcome you all here to the opening of our 8th annual conference, Why Privacy Matters. What do we lose when we lose our privacy? One or two quick notes. There is a hashtag for this conference, which is ArendtCon 2015, for those of you who like to tweet. And for questions during the conference, you can raise your hand, but you can also tweet questions to @Arendt_Center, and we will be also taking questions off of Twitter. Right now, it's my real honor and distinct pleasure again to introduce the president of Bard College, someone who has been unfaithfully supportive, or faithfully, I'm sorry. Yeah, the Freudian privacy issue is getting to me. Faithfully and unfailingly supportive of the Arendt Center, and that's, I think, for many reasons, but not least of which is that he was a student of Hannah Arendt's at the University of Chicago, where he wrote his senior thesis with her, and was a lifelong friend of hers from then on. He's been able to and support every conference we've done, spoke at all but one of them, one is scheduled in Delau, and I'm really thrilled to introduce Leon Botstein.
So first of all, I want to welcome you all, and I want to make Roger feel better. So my impression is that Hannah Arendt was not particularly interested in Freud. And I think she would have been skeptical of the sort of common language notion that if you make a slip of the tongue, which contradicts what you intended to say, but could reveal the fact that you think the college hasn't sufficiently supported the Hannah Arendt anymore. And therefore, we're not your faithful supporters, but your unfaithful supporters. But also I want to reassure you further than that even if you took the Freudian view, the reason you made this slip has nothing to do with Hannah Arendt, me, or the conference. That it has to do with some other form of very complex displacement, which has nothing to do with the overt subject. So rest assured, it was a compliment. It means that this conference and I and Bard are closely related to some very important matter in your subconscious, which means the thing that I fear and that probably she feared the most was thoughtlessness and not caring. So it's a compliment. So anytime you say the exact opposite to someone you care about, you now have a means of defense. Because we always think that's what you must really mean. So I want to pay a compliment to Roger that this is, I think, the 8th conference. And when he had the idea of doing a Hannah Arendt Center, he is a political theorist and a lawyer and came to the faculty here in politics. And the idea of creating a center around Hannah Arendt, whose husband had been a member of the faculty for a long time, from 51 to the late 60s, and she spent a lot of time here, had a house across the way in Palinville, and actually she had a crucial role in my becoming president of Bard many years ago. So she had a deep attachment to the college. She's buried here, and her library is here. She bequeathed her personal library to the college. I think she was probably inspired by the fact that she thought the library wasn't really up to snuff, so they could use her own collection. I don't think she had any idea that it would be the object of a lot of scholarly scrutiny. And but none of us ever had the vision or the capacity to figure out what could be done with this legacy without sounding either artificial or appropriating a person whose stature as intellectual has only grown since her death in the end of 1975, actually in the fall. So I want to pay a particular compliment to Roger and what he's done with the Hannah Arendt Center, and this conference is proof of it. Next year's, I understand, is slated to be probably even more controversial and on point. I don't want to delay the proceedings. I want to welcome all of you here. We have people from all over, and also people from many of our Bard High School programs are here, and we have undergraduates and guests, and I want to bid all of you a very dear welcome. The subject here, as far as I can construe, is one that, from Arendt's point of view, is deeply related to the nature of the quality of political life in a society. Although it's about privacy, it is actually about the nature of political life and the nature of citizenship from her point of view. It's not a legalistic issue, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of discussion about whether there is and what would be a legal right to privacy, a derivative of Supreme Court decisions and interpretations of the Bill of Rights. I think it's something that Roger Berkowitz has pointed out as well, that it's deeply related from Arendt's point of view to the notion that if you're going to have a good public life, you have to have a safe and possible intimate life, a personal life that's not public. If you bleed the boundaries between the public and the private, you eviscerate the idea of a public political life. You also deprive humans of their capacity to exercise their full humanity, which for Arendt would have probably been in the aesthetic realm. When she died, she was in the process of beginning not only to finish the 2 unfinished volumes, The Thinking and Willing, which she was writing essentially her mirror image of the 3 critiques of Immanuel Kant, the first on thinking, which paralleling the Critique of Pure Reason, the second on willing, paralleling the Critique of Practical Reason, and she was about to embark, in my last conversation with her was about this matter, on the aesthetics, the issue of judgment, because Heinrich Blücher's primary interest as a thinker was in the area of aesthetics. And he had left some lectures which are in the library, which she was reading, and that's what we talked about. And she had a lifelong interest in poetry and in painting, and less so in music, but Heidegger did, and she did in a very limited way, but poetry and painting particularly. And from her point of view, the capacity to make art and the capacity to experience the aesthetic dimension was absolutely tied to the space and character of what we would call private life. It's hard to remember that all of the individuals of her generation who experienced the Second World War and the expulsion from Germany, the German Jewish intellectuals, Herbert Marcuse, who did his original work in aesthetics as well, that the issue of privacy was not trivial, because the transformation of the legal landscape under the Nazis in the 1930s eliminated the rights of privacy, the rights to one's person, and that the incarceration, taking away the most heinous, which of course is the extermination, but the incarceration of human beings in conditions in which there is no privacy, which is the nature of incarceration, and the incarceration in concentration camps, and the deprivation of rights to property, rights to movement, rights to conduct one's life as one wishes, was not a trivial matter, it was not a decorative matter, it was not a partial matter. And the intrusion of the public sphere into the private lives of citizens who were deprived of their citizenship or never had full citizenship, that traumatic experience of the loss of any concept of privacy and dignity informed her work, and informed also the tremendous premium that is placed on the arts. contrary to our society, in which we simply don't really think seriously about the arts as connected to the conduct of our political life. But in that case, the aesthetic imagination, the ability to dream and to think and to invent as an individual, protected in a political context, so that the highest possibilities of human experience can flourish, was a deeply important and politically contingent matter. Her glorification of ancient Athens was partly informed by exactly what Thucydides describes as the triumph of the Periclean age, which was the flourishing of the arts and the flourishing of the work of human imagination in both tragedy and in poetry, and the quality of the civilization that a democracy and a good public space created. And for that to happen, the sanctity of the individual and the space of creative endeavor, privacy, immune, whether from a corporation or from the state, was crucial. So it was something deeply political and personal was at stake, so I can think of no better subject that connects more deeply to her legacy. Although, and this is Roger's achievement, we are not here to enshrine there are many institutions that have the name of famous people that are kind of post-mortem efforts to keep people alive. And most of the conversation is about keeping a flame alive. And then they're second and third generation holders of a catechism about who that person is. I imagine if they were a Leo Strauss Center, that's what that would be. That's what Bayreuth in Germany is, about Wagner. So there's nothing remotely new or interesting about it. But there's an attempt to keep up an orthodoxy. That's not what it's about. And so the center has become a forum for many discussions and many issues that have nothing else to do with Arendt except a respect for the importance of thinking, and thinking without cliches, and thinking independently, even if it completely contradicts anything she might have believed. So that is the freedom and the tremendous range of scope of the Arendt Center, and it is really a terrific achievement. And I turn the floor back over to you, Roger, to get the proceedings going. Thank you very much for coming.
It's a real privilege to teach at a college in which the president can speak extemporaneously on so many different topics that every year, no matter what I choose for a conference, I'm confident that he will have something incredibly meaningful and thoughtful to say, and I thank him for that. I also just don't want to forget to thank the Center for Civic Engagement here at Bard, which has also been very supportive of the Arendt Center, which we are a part of and thrilled to be a part of. Yes, thank you. So I want to begin today and try and introduce some of the themes of the conference and what we're going to talk about. And while President Botstein did rightly say that we don't pick our topics as a way of enshrining some orthodoxy about Hannah Arendt, one of the things I love about Hannah Arendt is that she had no orthodoxies, and that she also, unlike most philosophers, and she didn't call herself a philosopher, although it's hard to know what she was, a thinker, she thought about the world. And thus, what I've learned over the last 8 years is that there's almost no topic that I pick that I can't find something incredibly deep, thoughtful, and provocative that Arendt says about it, that offers a way into it that is really outside the common discourse. And so I've taken to using these introductory talks to sort of provide a Arendtian twist on these topics, and today our topic is why privacy matters. And one of the quotes, or one of the things that I read a couple of years ago that really got me thinking about this topic was this quotation from Scott McNealy of Sun Microsystems. He's the CEO. And he said, "You have no privacy. Get over it." And I guess I thought two things. One is, he might actually be right about the first part. We have no privacy. And what does that mean? And the more you read about our world today, it becomes increasingly clear that that's a real question. That doesn't mean, there are ways in which we have more privacy today than ever before. I mean, if you think about the number of people who live in single-family dwellings in the United States compared to people who used to live in multi-family rooms, and who still do in many places in the world, there's just so much more privacy today than ever before. Our entire architectural system, as Hans Sturz will be speaking about later, is in many ways designed to keep us out of the public and protect us in the private. And our communication system and our cars, our transportation system, are very private. So there's a way in which we have a lot of privacy. And yet, increasingly, there's also ways in which we don't. Technology is not the only thing that is taking away our privacy, but I think at this point it is a unique challenge. And just think about some of the things that are being developed right now. Smart refrigerators, right? Why do we need such a thing? Well, we're busy, and if we run out of milk and we forget, we're upset in the morning, and so the refrigerator keeps track of what we have, knows our brands, and orders us new milk. And that's great, but it may also order us new beer, may order us, junk food, and the point is there are privacy issues about someone hacking into that system, but also just then them recommending new things for you, and to what extent is your food consumption habits out there in the world. The bigger issue, as I don't know who it is, but someone is working on this app right now called Dr. Cloud, right? And Dr. Cloud basically puts some sensors on you, which is already happening with those Fitbits and Apple Watches, but it's very close to being in you as well, where your sensors are in your body, in your bloodstream, in your nerves, and they constantly update to the cloud your heart rate, your stress levels, certain chemical compositions, and it might send you a text message saying, take this medicine, take a rest, do this. And then, of course, it's just a short drop to that to, I've implanted certain medicines in my body, and it will automatically release them because I don't want to be bothered to take them, so I set it on auto pay, like I do my electric bill. And the point is that the privacy implications of these things are enormous. And we are coming to a point very quickly in which this Internet of Things that is emerging is going to possibly make it such that almost nothing is private and nothing is safe. And we have to deal with that. So I think, Scott McNealy at least has a point. And the second part of it, get over it, was the part I had a harder time with. I'm not quite ready to get over it. I understand that there are advantages to it, and I'm going to be talking about those, but I think in many ways the conference is about whether we should get over it. I'm going to suggest that there's 3 reasons why we are willfully and willingly losing our privacy. What I mean by that is that we actually, most of us, while we talk about the fact that we like our privacy and want to preserve our privacy, most of us are actually quite happy to give it up. And the first reason is that privacy is inconvenient. So in the age of context, Robert Scoble, a technologist, and the journalist Shel Israel write, technology offers a privacy trade-off. The more technology knows about you, the more benefits you will receive. That can leave you with the chilling sensation that big data is watching you. In the vast majority of cases, we believe the coming benefits are worth the trade-off. What they mean is that if you have Dr. Cloud and the smart refrigerator and the new thing I'm getting next week, the smart toothbrush that takes pictures of your teeth and sends them to your dentist so that they can call you if you're getting a cavity and you don't have to go in for a checkup. These are the trade-off is awesome. So my dentist gets my medical records, but I don't have to worry about making an appointment, and the trade-off is worth it. And I think that this trade-off is happening increasingly. All of us are engaged in it, and as it happens, we will have that feeling of being surveilled, watched, looked at all times. And most of us worry about it, but in the end choose to give up our privacy. The second reason I think we're going to give up our privacy increasingly is that privacy is dangerous. Edward Snowden, who will be on this screen tomorrow afternoon, revealed the NSA's programs that are watching Americans as well as foreigners. And that since that time, according to Pew, 57% of Americans say it is unacceptable for the governments to monitor the communications of U.S. citizens. That's approximately the same number as before he released the documents. But interestingly enough, 65% support monitoring of those particular individuals who use words like explosives and automatic weapons in their search engine queries. And 67% support monitoring those who visit anti-American websites. So even though, again, there's a lot of interest in saying, stop spying on us, stop looking at us, when push comes to shove, we actually want the government, most of us, to continue spying us and monitoring us. About half of Americans view the NSA favorably, right? About the same number as before Mr. Snowden released his information, compared with 37% who have an unfavorable view. And this was shocking to me when I first read it. About 6 in 10 of those under 30, the younger of us, view the NSA favorably, compared with 40% of those 65 and older. It's the older people amongst us who are more worried about our privacy than the younger, and I think that's clearly about a question of familiarity with technology. This is expressed by the great journalist Paul McMullen of the News of the World, who said to the Leveson inquiry into his misbehavior that he violated privacy, privacy is for pedos, right? What he means by that is the only people who care about privacy are pedophiles and people like them, criminals. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to lose, right? That's the cliche, that's the mantra of those who would say, take away your privacy. The response to that mantra is everybody has something to hide, and thus everything has something to lose. And yet, somehow, again, most of us continue to accept the intrusion into our private life. To afford private life this protection is evil, McMullen says. Right? Now, he's a journalist. He's not, and he's a tabloid journalist. But the point is, he represents, I think, a strong and important view that needs to be taken seriously. The third reason that I think we're going to increasingly give up our privacy is that privacy is generally anti-democratic. Now, a lot of people also make the argument that privacy provides the kind of individualism that allows for a strong democracy. And I think that's true to a large extent. And yet, E.L. Gotkin, the founder of The Nation magazine, writing in 1890, and by the way, I credit, and I should credit Rochelle Gerstein, who brought this to my attention, and she'll be speaking later today in her book, The Repeal of Reticence. Mr. Gotkin writes, in all democratic societies today, the public is disposed either to resent attempts at privacy, either of mind or body, or to turn them to ridicule. There is nothing democratic societies dislike so much today as anything which looks like what is called exclusiveness, and all regard for and precautions about privacy are apt to be considered signs of exclusiveness. Namely, to claim, look, don't violate my privacy. I want to be, alone. I don't want you to know what I do, is to say that I have a privilege. And we had a great debate last night with West Point and Bard students debating on the resolution that in the name that national security is more important than individual privacy. And one of the themes that the debaters really hit upon was the classism and racism of arguments for privacy. Because the fact is, many people who are poor, who are incarcerated, who live in neighborhoods that are more surveilled by the police, have much less privacy than those who are wealthier, whiter, and more able to, and also male. I mean, this is a big part of it too. I mean, one of the great attacks on privacy of the last 50 years has been the feminist movement, in which women have rightly said, you know, the idea that men control the house and that marital rape is not rape, and that these things continue to go on and women are supposed to stay in the dark, these things were considered to be claims of privacy that were deeply classist, racist, and sexist, and so anti-democratic. Thus, privacy as anti-democratic is a kind of hypocrisy. And David Brin, who will be up here next, writes, whenever a conflict arises between privacy and accountability, people demand the former for themselves, namely privacy, and the latter, accountability, for everybody else. I mean, I think we all understand that. We want Donald Sutherland to be brought down, right, for his racist comments that he said to his girlfriend in private. But we wouldn't want people listening to what we say to our girlfriends and wives and boyfriends in private and putting them out on the internet. We all say things we would rather not have other people know we've said. And we'll talk more about that. Thus, what I want to try and say is with these three things, the anti-democratic nature of privacy, the dangerous nature of privacy, and the inconvenient nature of privacy, is that the danger to privacy is not technology, right, but desire. Technology merely makes possible, to an extent never before imagined possible, the human desire to improve and instruct ourselves and others, even at the expense of what makes us human. Namely, we are increasingly using technology to improve ourselves, to create better health for ourselves, to teach ourselves more, to monitor what we do, right? There's these apps that, you know, beep at you if you go to certain websites that you program so that you concentrate more on your work. Great. But your private lives is being invaded in every moment. Edward Snowden has become probably the advocate in chief for the idea that we must, as a society, stand up and resist this encroachment, this loss of privacy. And the title for the conference, Why Privacy Matters, is largely a paean to his comments at the Christmas message on British television, where he said, a child born today will grow up with no conception of privacy at all. They'll never know what it means to have a private moment to themselves, an unrecorded, unanalyzed thought. Privacy matters. Privacy is what allows us to determine who we are and who we want to be. I think that's an important and provocative point. And I started about 2 or 3 years ago looking at the theories of privacy and the writings on privacy. And anyone who's done that, and we have some of the leading privacy scholars in the country here, including Anita Allen and others, sees very quickly that it's a very confused world. And it's a very hard thing. People sort of give this definition of privacy and that definition of privacy. And it's actually very hard to find any sustained, philosophical, thoughtful argument for why privacy matters. And if I'm correct in what I've said so far, which is that increasingly we are making the trade-off choice that it's more valuable to us to have convenience, security, and democracy than privacy, the only way we're going to stop that is not legislation, but creating a consensus and an idea in society that privacy actually is important. And one of the arguments I want to make is that the only thinker I know who really struggles with this and attempts to articulate a justification for why privacy matters is Hannah Arendt, right? And she talks about privacy in so many of her books. It's always there, and it's part of the core of her thought. And so I want to try in the next couple of minutes to articulate for you what is privacy for Hannah Arendt, why it matters. And what we're going to see is There's a reason that most Arendt scholars ignore this aspect of her work, because it leads to some very uncomfortable and difficult conclusions. Things that, in fact, some of the essays where she defends privacy are the essays that are most reviled in her work. And we're going to talk about that. So when she tries to make an argument for privacy, the first thing she argues is that privacy secures depth. She writes in The Human Condition, "A life spent entirely in public, in the presence of others, becomes, as we would say, shallow." This is, I think, to me, the most meaningful quote about privacy that I've come across. Privacy preserves our depth. It is in privacy where we have secrets. What do secrets do? They make me different from you. They make me worried about things that I know and no one else knows. They separate me from you. They create a darkness that I know that I come out of. And it's that depth that is crucial to who I am. We all commit crimes, some small, some bigger. We all have vices. And it's those vices and crimes, those intimate secrets, that make us an interesting person. Hannah Arendt continues and writes, "While a public life retains its visibility, it loses the quality of rising into sight from some darker ground which must remain hidden, if it is not to lose its depth in a very real, non-subjective sense. The only efficient way to guarantee the darkness of what needs to be hidden against the light of publicity is private property, a privately owned place to hide in." So there's two parts to this quotation, right? The first is that, again, privacy secures a kind of depth, a darkness that is the non-subjective place of who we are and our exclusiveness and uniqueness as a person. The second, and this is also quite controversial for most academics, and one of the reasons it's often not talked about, is that she says, look, the only way in history that we can secure privacy, darkness, depth, is private property. Which is why I was asked the other night, what is the one thing you would legislate if you could change something? And it would be to totally ban all data recording devices, sensors, cameras, etc., from the household. Right? At some point, we may just have to do something like that in order to secure people in their right to privacy. Oh, it's a controversial topic. We can talk about it later. So here are three examples of what I mean. I mentioned Donald Sterling later. You may remember him. He was the owner of a basketball team who was dating a biracial woman, significantly younger than him, and who, in a private phone conversation with her that she recorded, complained that she had taken some minority friends, some black friends, to a basketball game and had taken a selfie with Magic Johnson. And she said, "You're racist." And he said, "I'm not racist. You can bring Magic Johnson over for dinner. You can bring your friends over for dinner. You can sleep with him," he said. Interesting. But the only thing I ask is you don't put it in public, because some of my friends don't want to see that. Okay, not very nice, right? But should that private conversation have been recorded? Wasn't that a betrayal of an intimacy between two people? Would you like all your private conversations to be recorded? And if all your private conversations were recorded, what kind of conversations would you have? Right? And that's why Hillary Clinton's up here, right? If our public figures are going to be listened to and watched in everything they say and write, I mean, who doesn't communicate via email anymore or text? I know no one below 25 uses email, text, or Instagram or whatever. If everything you write and say is public, you're not going to write or say anything interesting. And if you never write or say anything interesting, over time you will never think anything interesting. do we want our public officials, I mean, they may do this already, but it's going to get worse. And then Facebook. You know, one of the things I've learned over the last 5 years that I've had a minimally used Facebook account is that when the people that I'm friends with on Facebook, I think 500 of them, some of them I've never met in my life. And I don't usually like that, but you know, sometimes there's reasons to do it. Some of them I used to be friends with. Some of them I'm sort of still social with, and some of them are still friends of mine. But what I've learned is that the people who are on Facebook, they expect me to read it. And so when an important event happens, like they get married or they have a child, they don't call me and tell me. And if I haven't read it on Facebook, I don't know it. And so I stop actually talking to them. What I've found is that my closest friends are increasingly the friends who are not on Facebook. Why? Because they're the ones who call me and I call them when something happens. And we still talk to each other. And so Facebook is destroying the depth of friendships. I mean, I try to have this conversation with students, and they say, but it allows me to keep in touch with people all over the world. Yeah, but how many of them are you actually talking to meaningfully? And that is a real problem. The second argument that Arendt makes is that privacy protects life. And by life, what she means is not exactly staying alive, but life as the drive to acquire, to do things, initiative in life. And she says the distinction between the private and the public realms equals the distinction between things that should be shown and things that should be hidden. There are some things that should be hidden, like our work life, but also things I own, things that are personal to me, and I want to acquire them, whether it's a car or a nice rare book or a first edition of The Human Condition, things like that. And the truth is, those are things that I want to acquire. They lead to initiative, and they're not to be shared for Arendt. Love is not to be shared. Friendship can be public, but love not. The sacredness of this privacy was like the sacredness of the hidden, namely birth and death. Have you noticed how many books to these days are about people dying? Memoirs of people dying? Death used to be one of the most private of experiences that you experienced with your family, maybe even one or two friends. And yet now we have blogs and books sharing people's deaths. The idea being that death has become a public event. The idea being that you can make your life more meaningful by sharing it with 2 million people. Whereas death no longer is a good death where you reflect upon and consider your life with your closest intimates. It's now a public event. And one of the articles that really brought this home to me, and I think she's here today, Dawn Herrera-Helpand wrote an article, Into the Cave, in the Point magazine, and it really struck me. It was about the experience of giving birth. And she writes, giving birth afforded me a fresh perspective on Arendt's distinction between what should be hidden and what should be shown. She says that when she gave birth, and she also talked about her cousin, and they're talking about their giving birth, there was a sense that birth was almost like an animal-like thing where you got in passion with your yell and your primal scream and your sense of giving birth like a bear with a bear cub coming out, right? It's a really evocative piece. And what she says is that was so private, and it was part of who she was. And she realized that if she had given birth in public on TV, like some people do nowadays, right, that experience of giving birth would have been completely different and less meaningful to her. The illusion of sovereignty, this idea that we're always in control, that we cultivate in public is precious and not easily relinquished. The ambition to maintain it is antithetical to the necessary labor of childbirth. I thought that was an incredibly insightful point. And the third and final defense of privacy that Arendt makes is that privacy enables judgment, judgments of taste. And Hannah Arendt writes, the activity of taste decides how this world, independent of its utility and our vital interest in it, is to look and sound, what men will see and what they will hear in it. We have arguments, right? Should there be abortion or not? Should we have Viagra ads on the TV during baseball games or not? Should we have Victoria's Secret down the street in residential neighborhoods? And as Rochelle Gerstein writes in her book, The Repeal of Reticence, we no longer can have these conversations meaningfully because anyone who says, you know what, we shouldn't do that, is immediately called a prude or a Victorian. And we're unable to have an actual conversation of what is beautiful. If you say that's not art, you're considered an elitist. If you say that's not beautiful, you're considered, a subjective totalitarian. If you say that's not good, you're considered an objective thinker and not understanding the relativity of goodness. And so the result is we simply stop having the conversations. And it's ad hominem attacks take the place of public conversations about what the public common world means. Jonathan Franzen has a brilliant essay about this called The Immortal Bedroom. And he writes, "My sense of privacy functions to keep the public out of the private and to keep the private out of the public." I have no idea if Jonathan Franzen reads Hannah Arendt, but that is almost quoted verbatim from The Human Condition. "A kind of mental border collie yelps in distress when I feel that the line between the two has been breached." Hannah Arendt never wrote that well. So there's the reason to use Jonathan Franzen. "This is why the violation of a public space is so similar as an experience to the violation of privacy. I walk past a man taking a leak on a sidewalk in broad daylight, and although the man with the yawning fly is ostensibly the one whose privacy is compromised by the leak, I'm the one who feels the impingement. Reticence, meanwhile, has become an obsolete virtue." Right? I feel the impingement. He's invading my privacy. What is he doing? He's demeaning the fact that in public we should act differently than in private. He's refusing the idea that there are certain things we should be reticent about, not speak about. And if you complain about that, you're a prude, right? Again, I mentioned Rochelle Gerstein's book. She writes, "In the 20th century, the faculties of taste and judgment, along with the sense of the sacred and the shameful, have become utterly vacant. Yet without them, it is now clear that disputes about the character of our common world can only be trivial, if not altogether meaningless." The point is that privacy, and for Arendt, doesn't just protect privacy and depth, it also protects the meaningfulness and substance of the public world. I said earlier that the essays in which she talks about privacy are somewhat controversial. Probably the most reviled and controversial essay Hannah Arendt ever wrote was her essay Reflections on Little Rock, about the decision of the United States government to forcefully desegregate the schools in Little Rock, Arkansas. And no one wants to talk about this essay. They consider it an embarrassment. And yet it is the one essay in which the fundamental theme of the essay is privacy, right? It is where she most directly makes her argument for privacy. And so I want to talk about it because I think it's important. And I also want to talk about it because I think it shows the challenges of defending privacy in the 20th century. So in Little Rock, she writes, "To force parents to send their children to an integrated school against their will means to deprive them of rights which clearly belong to them in all free societies: the private right over their children and the social right to free association." So I just want to be very clear. Hannah Arendt fundamentally supports the court's striking down of legal segregation, right? She says it is wrong to have legal segregation, to make it illegal for people to go to integrated schools, to make it legal to have only one-race schools. But, she says, that's different from forcing integration. Because if there's anything privacy means, it's about birth and death, She also says it's about the right to marry whom you choose, whether that person is of another race or of the same gender, right? She says those are fundamental privacy rights, and there's no business of the government getting involved. But one of the fundamental privacy rights, one of the things that's most defined our society as a place where we live a private life, is our right to raise our children as we see fit. And what she says here is that to forcefully tell people you have to send them to this kind of school, whether it's an integrated school or a school that teaches Western civilization, or one that teaches Christianity, or one that teaches Judaism, or one that teaches atheism, to force that upon them is, she says, a violent violation of privacy. She says privacy is really deeply about children, because the child must be protected against the world. His traditional place is in the family, whose adult members daily return back from the outside world and withdraw into the security of private life within four walls. These four walls, within which people's private family life is lived, constitute a shield against the world, and specifically against the public aspect of the world. They enclose a secure place without which no living thing can thrive. We need a private house for children, because children, if they're exposed to the public, will become shallow. She says children of famous people have a real problem because they think they're always being watched, and they don't develop, she thinks, in the same way. They don't develop the deep personal life that children need. And she thinks the privacy of the family, with all of its problems, and there are problems, must be protected. The private, she says, is about uniqueness. So the rules of uniqueness and exclusiveness are and always will be in conflict with the standards of society. We want people to act normal. We want people to act without prejudice. We want people to act healthy. We want people to act smart, right? Nudge society, as Cass Sunstein's writing. We want people to be rational. And she says, but in private, we're unique, exclusive, and that's a conflict. Social discrimination violates the principle of uniqueness and lacks validity for the conduct of private life. So on the one hand, if we discriminate and say only Jews can go to this resort, or only Christians can go to this resort, that in some way is a violation of privacy. But she says that's the right of free association in the social world. She says in society, we should discriminate. There's no problem with Jews hanging out with Jews, or Christians hanging out with Christians, or Muslims hanging out with Muslims, right? It's only in public, at a restaurant on the strip, where you shouldn't be able to discriminate, or in a bus, because that's a public good. That's where people interact, not as social friends, but as public citizens. And that's the distinction she makes. And she finally says, for reasons too complicated to discuss here, the power of society in our time, namely the way society imposes itself on our private life, the power of society in our time is greater than it ever was before, and not many people are left who know the rules of and live a private life. We're too put upon by the rules of society and conformity. But this provides the body politic with no excuse for forgetting the rights of privacy, for failing to understand that the rights of privacy are grossly violated whenever legislation begins to enforce social discrimination. While a government has no right to interfere with the prejudices and discriminatory practices of society, it has not only the right, but the duty to make sure that these practices are not legally enforced. We should never allow a state or a locality or a place to enforce segregation. But individual groups we can't interfere with. Now that's her point, and she makes the point. We don't have to agree with it about education. I think today most of us would almost certainly say she was wrong. But the point is that privacy is always in contest with social and normal standards of progress. And I think what her essay, as controversial as it is, the reason it deserves to be read is it reminds us how counter privacy is to our basic instincts that we should improve ourselves. She I want to end, this is a final slide. In her book On Revolution, she writes, "The human heart is a place of darkness, which with certainty no human eye can penetrate." The human heart, right? We know. We don't, first of all, we don't even know ourselves, right? God can see the nakedness of a human heart, but we don't even see it. And yet, we know that, we may dress like this in public, but we know what we really want to be doing or looking like. We may say the right things in public, but we also know that other thoughts, like happened to me earlier, come into our head, right? We know that our heart, thoughts that pop into our head, lusts, desires, vices, are there. And if we limit ourselves, if we make ourselves reveal those, we will become much less interesting. But the other thing is the public life will be demeaned. And so let me just conclude with this. Is this still on? Privacy guards the dark recesses of the human heart. At a time when we possess a voracious human need to know everything and demystify all authority, private life names the threatened core of human mystery. Privacy may be the right to be left alone, as Samuel Warren and Louis Brandeis wrote in their famous article of 1890. But privacy is not simply about keeping one's name out of the gossip columns, although it must also include that. Privacy matters not because it protects our embarrassing secrets, but because it affirms that having secrets is part of what makes us human. Private life matters because it makes possible a self that is unfathomable, a self that is irreducible to quantifiable things among things. Private life is where we hold secrets, hidden from the world, that give us depth. Private life is where our secrets, our deviations, our vices, and even our crimes make us unique, interesting, and human. Private life is the border collie that guards the public from the intrusions of private matters and thus opens a realm of common judgment about what is beautiful and what is ugly, true and false, right and wrong. And private life matters also because it insists that there is an inchoate and yet essential border separating those things that should be seen and spoken about in public and those secret and dark and profound thoughts that live and thrive only within the darkness of the human heart. Because privacy matters, and because we are in danger of losing our privacy, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 8th Annual Hannah Arendt Center Conference, Why Privacy Matters. What do we lose when we lose our privacy?